In the heart of the Middle Ages, castles rose across Europe as symbols of power, protection, and prestige. These massive stone fortresses defined the landscape, standing high above villages and fields. The history of castles was more than just walls and towers. It was the foundation of the feudal system, where lords ruled from their strongholds. Castles served as military outposts, administrative centers, and noble residences. For medieval knights, these fortresses were both training grounds and sanctuaries. Life in a medieval European kingdom revolved around their shadow, from peasants tilling the land outside the gates to knights sharpening swords in the courtyards. To understand medieval warfare, one must first understand the castle. It was the heart of defense, the throne of authority, and the beating pulse of daily life in the Middle Ages.
At the core of medieval life stood the feudal system. It was a hierarchy where kings granted lands to powerful lords, who in turn relied on knights for protection and peasants for labor. The feudal system bound everyone together, from the highest noble to the humblest serf. Castles' history showed that power was not just measured by stone walls, but by the loyalty sworn within them. Medieval knights pledged service to their lords, promising military aid in exchange for land or privilege. Serfs toiled in the fields, bound by duty rather than freedom, providing food for the entire structure. This system shaped daily life in the Middle Ages, where every man and woman knew their place. The order brought stability, but also rigid inequality. Without it, the medieval kingdom could not have survived the constant threat of medieval warfare and invasion.
Becoming a medieval knight was no easy path. From childhood, noble sons began as pages, serving lords and learning manners, literacy, and religion. By adolescence, they advanced to squires, assisting knights directly in battle and training with weapons. Castles provided the perfect setting for this education, their courtyards echoing with clashing swords and the thunder of hooves. A knight's life was defined by discipline and loyalty, with the chivalric code guiding their behavior both on and off the battlefield. Medieval warfare demanded not only strength but skill, for knights were expected to master sword, lance, and horseback combat. This long journey from page to knight embodied the values of the feudal system. When a squire was finally dubbed a knight, it was more than a title. It was the acceptance of lifelong duty to defend his lord, his faith, and his people.
The strength of a castle lay in its defenses. Towers loomed high, walls thick with stone, and moats dug deep around the perimeter. Every detail of castles' history showed innovation in medieval warfare. Arrow slits allowed archers to fire from safety, while drawbridges controlled who entered the gate. Inside, murder holes above gateways allowed defenders to rain down stones or boiling oil on attackers. To storm a fortress was no easy feat. Siege engines like trebuchets and battering rams tested these defenses, but castles often withstood months of assault. For medieval knights, defending a castle was as much about patience as courage. The fortress was both sword and shield, embodying the struggle for survival in the Middle Ages. Each castle told a story of power, conflict, and endurance, carved into stone by generations who lived and fought within its walls.
Within the castle walls, daily life followed its own rhythm. Lords and ladies oversaw the household, while servants prepared meals in smoky kitchens. The great hall echoed with feasts, music, and political decisions.
For medieval knights, the castle offered rest between campaigns, a place to polish armor and share stories of war. Children played in courtyards, monks copied manuscripts in chapels, and peasants delivered goods through the gates. Despite the grandeur, castle life was not without hardship. Drafty halls, scarce food in winter, and constant vigilance against attack defined existence. Castle's history revealed both majesty and struggle, for even stone walls could not keep out disease or famine. Still, the castle remained a beacon of order in the uncertainty of the Middle Ages, a fortress where faith, family, and feudal duty intertwined.
Most people in a medieval kingdom did not live inside the castle, but in the villages beyond its walls. These peasants formed the backbone of the feudal system. They worked the fields from dawn until dusk, providing the food that sustained lords and knights. Their homes were small, made of timber and thatch, with little comfort. Daily life in the Middle Ages for peasants was harsh, marked by heavy labor, high taxes, and limited freedom. In return for protection, they were bound to the land, unable to leave without their lord's permission. Despite hardships, villages buzzed with life. Markets, festivals, and church gatherings broke the monotony. The castle loomed in the distance, a constant reminder of authority. In times of war, villagers fled inside its gates, turning the fortress into both a shield and a prison until the danger passed.
Religion permeated every aspect of medieval life. The church stood as the most powerful institution, shaping morality, law, and even warfare. In castles, chapels hosted daily prayers, while monasteries preserved knowledge through manuscripts. Knights swore oaths not only to their lords, but also to God, guided by the principles of chivalry and faith. Daily life in the Middle Ages revolved around the rhythm of the church. Baptisms, marriages, and funerals all passed under its blessing. For peasants, the village church was both a place of worship and community gathering. The church also wielded immense political power, influencing kings and dictating terms of medieval warfare through crusades and holy wars. In the feudal system, spiritual authority often rivaled secular power, creating both harmony and conflict. Faith was not just belief, it was survival, shaping how people lived, fought, and died in medieval Europe. The image of the medieval knight is inseparable from his armor and weapons. Early knights wore chainmail, but as warfare evolved, full plate armor emerged, gleaming in the sunlight. Castle's history tells of armorers perfecting their craft, forging helmets, gauntlets, and breastplates that combined protection with mobility. A knight's arsenal included swords, lances, and shields bearing family crests. Training required mastery of horseback combat, as mounted knights dominated medieval warfare. Armor was heavy, yet designed with joints to allow surprising agility. However, it was costly, marking knighthood as a privilege of wealth. Beyond the battlefield, armor symbolized status, authority, and fear. A knight in shining armor was both warrior and icon, embodying the feudal system's ideals of loyalty and strength. These tools of war were not just weapons, but extensions of the knight's identity in the Middle Ages.
When knights were not at war, they displayed their skills in tournaments. These events, held within castle grounds or nearby fields, combined sport, spectacle, and training. The most famous contests were jousts, where two armored knights charged with lances, aiming to unseat their rival. The crowd roared as splintered wood flew through the air. Beyond entertainment, tournaments sharpened combat skills essential for medieval warfare. They also reinforced the chivalric code, as knights competed for honor and the favor of noble ladies. Lords used these spectacles to display wealth and power, turning martial training into political theater. Castle's history shows that tournaments became cultural milestones, blending violence with pageantry. For peasants, it was a rare chance to witness knights up close. For knights, it was practice for the battlefield, where the stakes were no longer sport, but survival. Life in a medieval castle was not solely dominated by men. Noble women played vital roles in managing households, overseeing servants, and even defending castles in their husband's absence. The lady of the castle often organized feasts, arranged marriages, and managed estates, ensuring the feudal system functioned smoothly. In times of medieval warfare, women sometimes directed defenses, inspiring loyalty among knights and soldiers. Beyond politics, they were patrons of art, literature, and religion, fostering culture within stone walls. Yet their lives were also constrained by expectation and duty, bound by the strict order of the Middle Ages. From embroidery to estate management, from child-rearing to diplomacy, noble women influenced daily life more than chroniclers admit. Castle's history reveals that without these women, the rhythm of medieval kingdoms would have faltered, for they balanced power with perseverance in silence and strength.
Sieges defined the brutal reality of medieval warfare. When armies could not defeat knights in open battle, they turned their strength against castles. Siege engines thundered, trebuchets hurled stones, battering rams pounded gates, and ladders scaled walls. Castle's history is filled with stories of hunger and disease within, as defenders held out for months. To break morale, attackers sometimes cut off water or poisoned wells. For knights defending, it was a test of endurance, discipline, and loyalty to the feudal system. Within the walls, peasants, nobles, and clergy all suffered together, united by necessity. When castles finally fell, the results were devastating: plunder, slaughter, or forced surrender. Yet each siege advanced the art of war, pushing architects to design stronger fortifications. In the Middle Ages, the siege was both terror and innovation, shaping not only the battlefield, but the very walls of Europe's kingdoms.
Despite war, medieval life thrived through trade. Markets grew outside castle gates, attracting merchants with cloth, spices, and tools. These gatherings were essential for daily life in the Middle Ages, allowing peasants to exchange goods and lords to display wealth. Castles became centers of economic power, where taxes were collected and trade routes protected. The feudal system relied on this flow of goods, sustaining both peasants and knights. Over time, towns emerged near castles, bustling with artisans and guilds. Medieval knights, though warriors, also depended on merchants for armor and supplies. Trade connected distant kingdoms, bringing silk from the east and salt from the sea. Castles' history shows they were not only fortresses of stone, but also hubs of commerce. Through trade, medieval kingdoms turned survival into prosperity, weaving together a tapestry of culture and economy that endured beyond war.
In the mid-14th century, the Black Death swept through Europe, altering daily life in the Middle Ages forever. No castle wall, no knight's armor could shield against the invisible plague. Castles' history records empty halls, deserted villages, and mass graves outside once thriving towns. The feudal system weakened as laborers died in vast numbers, leaving fields untended and armies undermanned. Medieval knights who once charged into battle now watched helplessly as disease claimed comrades and families. Fear gripped kingdoms, yet faith grew intense, with prayers echoing in chapels and processions filling streets. The Black Death did more than devastate, it transformed. Survivors demanded higher wages, serfs found opportunities to escape bondage, and the structure of feudalism began to crack. In the shadow of the plague, Europe changed, reminding us that even the strongest castles could not resist the forces of nature.
Castles were not only fortresses, but also courts of law. Lords dispensed justice in great halls, settling disputes over land, crime, and honor. The feudal system ensured that loyalty was rewarded and betrayal punished, often harshly. Medieval knights swore oaths that, if broken, could cost them land or life. For peasants, justice was swift, sometimes cruel: fines, imprisonment, or public humiliation. Yet castles' history also reveals trials filled with ceremony, with banners, judges, and clerics ensuring proceedings upheld both secular and spiritual law. Justice reinforced order, binding together the fragile fabric of medieval kingdoms. In the Middle Ages, to enter a castle was not only to see power, but also to feel its authority. From gallows outside gates to solemn courts inside, castles embodied the law of the land, balancing violence with a sense of divine and human judgment.
By the late Middle Ages, a new force emerged: gunpowder. Cannons shattered stone walls that had stood for centuries, changing castles' history forever. The great fortresses that once symbolized invincibility now crumbled under bombardment. Medieval knights, trained in sword and lance, faced firearms that pierced armor with ease. The feudal system, rooted in knightly service, began to weaken as warfare evolved. Lords who once relied on castles for protection now turned to new strategies, building modern fortifications or abandoning castles altogether. Daily life in the Middle Ages shifted as the thunder of cannons replaced the clash of swords. Gunpowder marked the beginning of the end for traditional castles, ushering Europe toward the Renaissance. The age of medieval knights did not vanish overnight, but the balance of power tilted, forever altering the structure of kingdoms that had endured for centuries.
Amid hardship, castles also hosted joy. Festivals and feasts lit up medieval life, filling great halls with music, laughter, and abundance. Lords invited knights, nobles, and clergy to banquets, where roasted boar, spiced wine, and fresh bread adorned long tables. For peasants, such feasts were rare glimpses of wealth, but festivals and villages allowed them moments of relief from labor. These gatherings reinforced loyalty within the feudal system, binding lord and vassal in shared celebration. Tournaments often followed, turning merriment into martial display. Castles' history is painted not only with blood and war, but with pageantry, where minstrels sang of heroism and tapestries told stories of past battles. Daily life in the Middle Ages was harsh, but feasts reminded all that community and tradition could triumph over despair, bringing light to the shadow of stone walls.
While many peasants remained illiterate, castles and monasteries nurtured knowledge. Within fortified walls, noble children studied reading, Latin, and scripture. Knights learned not only warfare, but also diplomacy, law, and culture. Monks in scriptoriums copied manuscripts, preserving the wisdom of ancient Rome and Greece. Castles' history is tied to the spread of education, for they housed libraries, chapels, and scholars supported by noble patrons. The feudal system encouraged learning as a tool of government, enabling lords to manage estates and negotiate alliances. Daily life in the Middle Ages often revolved around oral tradition, yet in castles, written records ensured continuity. Though limited, medieval education laid the foundation for the Renaissance, proving that even in times of war, Knowledge was a weapon as vital as any sword or shield.
By the late Middle Ages, the feudal system began to decline. The Black Death, the rise of trade, and the growth of towns weakened the rigid ties between lords, knights, and peasants. Castles' history shifted as many fortresses were abandoned or transformed into palaces. Medieval knights found their role diminishing, replaced by professional armies loyal to kings rather than lords. Daily life in the Middle Ages was changing. Serfs gained freedom, peasants moved to towns, and monarchs centralized power. The feudal system, once the backbone of Europe, fractured under these pressures. Warfare, too, evolved, with gunpowder reshaping the battlefield. By the 15th century, the world of knights and castles was fading, giving way to a new era of nation-states. Yet its legacy remained, etched into stone ruins and cultural memory, reminding Europe of the age when loyalty, honor, and duty ruled the land. Though the Middle Ages ended, knights and castles left an enduring legacy. Their stone towers became ruins admired by generations, while the chivalric code influenced literature, romance, and ideals of honor. Castles' history inspired legends of Arthurian knights, fairy tales, and epics that still captivate today. The feudal system may have crumbled, but the memory of loyalty and duty shaped political thought. Medieval warfare evolved into modern tactics, yet the image of the knight remained a symbol of courage. Daily life in the Middle Ages is often romanticized, but beneath the hardship was a resilience that forged Europe's identity. Knights and castles stood at the crossroads of faith and power, war and peace, survival and culture. Their echoes linger not just in stone, but in the stories, traditions, and dreams passed down through centuries.
The story of knights and castles is the story of medieval Europe itself. From the rise of the feudal system to the clash of medieval warfare, from the hardship of daily life in the Middle Ages to the grandeur of stone fortresses, this world was shaped by both struggle and strength. Castle's history reveals more than ruins. It shows the heartbeat of kingdoms, where loyalty, faith, and power intertwined. Medieval knights embodied both war and honor, their shining armor now remembered more in legend than in battlefields. The Middle Ages were not only an age of darkness, but of resilience, creativity, and transformation. As we walk today among castle ruins, we walk through history's corridors, hearing echoes of swords, prayers, and songs. The age of knights may have passed, but its spirit still lingers in Europe's stones and stories.